with anyone individually as well. So, yeah, go ahead, Sean, if you want to.
I recently retired after a long career, and when you retire, you start thinking about the future. Of course, my wife has been asking me for 15, 20 years to do this, and so I finally got around to it. And it's good, you know, when I was retired, I had time to do that. Not that the process took a lot of time, but it was enough.
We decided on a living trust because my parents had one, and when they passed, it was very easy. We had 2 daughters, you know, for them, what to do with our, we wanted to take care of them, and we wanted to do it like, you know, the experience I had with my parents. My parents didn't have much. It was just their house, you know, they didn't have, you know, but it was still really easy.
We needed to do a living trust and power of attorney and a healthcare directive, and made some inquiries as to where would be a good place to do it, who would be a good person to do it with. And this Yee law firm was highly recommended, and so I made an appointment. The staff was very nice and told me exactly what the process was going to be, and the consultation was free. The office we weren't going to like somebody's house to do all this complicated stuff. We were going to do it at a legitimate law firm, and that's what I wanted. One of the things that I really appreciated from the office staff was communication. They emailed me about the appointment. They emailed me, did I have any questions? They emailed me. One of the things, the hard part about doing a trust is that you have to make all these decisions. You have to decide who's going to get what and how much, and who's going to take care of that for you, and who's going to take care of you when you're ill, who's going to make those decisions. You can't just sit down in the lawyer's office and decide that. You need to have those things discussed at home and thought it all out. But we had the questionnaire ahead of time, and we could fill all that out and think about it for a while before you actually made the final appointment and got everything down on paper.
I don't know how to do that. There's all these like online create your own trust type things, and as you go through that, there's just a lot of questions, a lot of nuances and details that, you know, someone who doesn't do this for a living would, you know, might not handle correctly. So we certainly wanted expert guidance and someone who's experienced in this, and we felt that Michael kind of had this balance of he's young but not too young, right? He has experience, and he's very focused on the specialty.
My sister was trying to do it online, so I asked both of them, I said, do you guys think I should do it online or get somebody? And before I finished the sentence, they were saying, no, don't do it yourself. Hire somebody. And she still hasn't done it. And so we told her that we got this law group to do it, and she's like, I wish I would have done that. So she's still like, you know, I don't know when she's going to finish it. So it was like, that's good enough for me. I'm glad I didn't do it.
When I started looking for a attorney to help with this, of course there's a lot of attorneys. There's a long list, but when I was researching individual firms, because you know there's some qualified firms, and it was kind of like this big tie with about a dozen firms. I started looking at some of the softer things around a company, and so I like that Michael grew up in the same neighborhood as I did. So it's nice to see success within the neighborhood. Also, when I was going through the web page, just doing preliminary research, I was impressed with the diversity of the staff, both our age diversity, gender diversity, and racial diversity. And to me, that's a very important factor.
We did read the reviews, you know.
Yes, we did.
The recommendations from the people on Nextdoor and the small things that they said.
Yes, well, I think everyone wants to do a trust and a will and to get their house in order, but it's actually a tough step to take because it makes you think about the future without you, right? This whole process makes you think about some stuff that most people don't want to think about.
I think it would have been like this monkey on my back if I hadn't got it done, because I'd known all the hassle that I went through, and I didn't want our granddaughter to go through that hassle. We wanted all those ducks in a row ahead of time, and then you can relax and enjoy the rest of your life, you know, because all that's taken care of, and you know it's not going to be a big burden to the person who's taking care of your things for you. It's not going to be hard to sell the house. It's not going to be hard to get into the bank account. It's not going to be hard to make decisions for you.
I like to tell my family and my friends to come and do it. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about the final days or the fixing the stuff before you go, but it's part of the life that you need to take care of your kids and your own stuff, whatever you work for all this life.
E-Law Group is definitely a 10 out of 10, and I guess the proof statement is I referred my brother-in-laws. And so once you start referring your family to a service, you better be sure it's good.
I'll go next.
Yeah, we'll go to your sides. Perfect.
Is this how you do it?
Yeah, I think that one.
All right. Am I good to go, Sean? Yeah. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. So just a quick another introduction. Again, I'm an advisor with Merrill Lynch, and what we do essentially is help our clients manage and invest their funds to hit certain goals, whether that be retirement, funding, education, estate planning, tax minimization, and so forth. That's essentially a part of our day-to-day sort of job. Our firm, Merrill Lynch and Bank of America, roughly manages close to $3 trillion. And me and my partners specifically, who are based out of Sacramento, my partners in Stockton, we manage roughly $150 million for about 80 families, some businesses, 401ks, and so forth. And again, what we do is really just have a good investment structure and systematic process in place. And from that, we create strategies that align with our clients' specific goals and objectives. So that's a little bit about us. I want to take you through first some investment fundamentals and market data, and then hopefully just walk you through our planning process, and then tie that all back in to how we really create investment strategies and portfolios. And in the end, I want to touch on a couple different topics with regards to minimum required distributions for retirement accounts, some charitable funding, and long-term care. So I'll incorporate all of that into the end. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to let me know. So what we're illustrating here essentially is market risk over close to about a 50-year period. As you can see throughout this 50 years that we're showing here, which illustrates large companies' stocks, there's contractions and recessions over that long period. But what really creates a successful outcome is being a long-term investor and making sure that you don't make decisions based on emotional or sort of sentiment that's out there that might be negative. Keeping an objective goal in mind and following the process that you've laid out in the beginning is what leads to successful outcomes for us. What we're illustrating here is essentially market timing and the risks of market timing. So in a lot of the negative sort of feedback that we hear from investors who are trying to get back in or new to investments is that somebody that they know or themselves had a negative experience during the financial crisis in 2008 or 2000, so forth. And essentially a lot of the negative experiences comes from market timing, where they thought the market was going to continue to decline, and essentially they pulled out their money, left it in cash with the expectation of a further decline, and then didn't invest back in for a couple years after that. So what we're illustrating here is essentially taking out at the market bottom and then leaving in cash for about a year and reinvesting back. And that changes to close to about 200,000 or so. It's a difference with the end portfolio balance. So what we're trying to say here is staying invested over sort of the variation and the volatility in the market is the best sort of strategy over the long term. There's different tactical changes that we'll make over time as sort of institutional investors, where we figure out where the market is, how it's priced, and so forth. We'll make those sort of changes. But I guess the thing to get away from this is, if you are an individual investor, making sure that you have a more long-term sort of mindset and making sure that you stay invested during those volatile times. Now, some of the risks when it comes to investing, these are major risks. There's other risks that accompany investments, but volatility risk, market risk, inflation risk, which is what we've been experiencing for the last couple of years, interest rate risk, which is sort of what we're in the midst of now, and then currency risk. That more so is something that's more correlated to investors who invest internationally. that sort of currency risk applies there. But right now, more so the inflation risk and interest rate risk is really what we're dealing with. So how do you get rid of some of those risks or lower the impact of them? We believe in a strong asset allocation of having different asset classes, large companies, small companies, different sectors of the market and so forth as a part of your overall strategy. And then making sure that you're diversified with uncorrelated assets, things that sort of move in different ways. And having that in place will minimize that sort of volatility that you'll have throughout the course of an investing year. And really importantly is making sure that you have a plan for rebalancing over the long period, whether that's quarterly, semi-annually, and so forth, just having some sort of strategy in place to rebalance over time. So doing all that, there's still the risk of sort of you stepping in your own way. And what happens with that is a lot of investors will essentially give in to some of the behavioral risks of investing where they invest at sort of the wrong times, or they go all in at times that are that the market's really overpriced, or they pull out at times that the market is really that the market's taken a correction and now they pull out sort of back to the point of market timing. And making sure that you're not getting into heavily at sort of the market highs or getting out when the market is in a sort of depressionary period. That's really important over the long period. Now, how do we get it to where you have an investment strategy and get to an endpoint with the least amount of risk as possible, or the least sort of turbulence as possible? Now, the asset allocation diversification is one part. The other part is making sure that you have a good strategic plan in place. Now, our planning process is called the Merrill Personal Wealth Analysis. I'll take you through a little bit of that. Essentially, our planning is all revolved around you. What we do is we gather information about your assets and liabilities. We get a good idea of the different goals you want to hit and the targets, whether that be retirement, traveling, healthcare, giving money to grandkids, charitable planning, and so forth, making sure that we have all the different goals that you want to hit in place to test your assets or your cash and investments and so forth against those goals. So we do that by creating this plan. We'll get a good idea of your net worth statement. We'll get your assets and liabilities, and we'll put that in a very clear picture for you to look at and evaluate. We'll get a good analysis of your asset allocation. So we'll get your statements and make sure that we get in detail about the different holdings that you have and see the risks of those specific holdings and how they really all work together. Once we have that, we'll test out the asset allocation, your assets and liabilities against the goals. And when we do that, we'll get you a good probability of success. And what we do and how we get that is essentially we run a simulation called the Monte Carlo analysis, where we run 1,000 different scenarios, testing different market conditions, economic cycles, taxes, and so forth, to make sure that we have a good probability of a successful outcome. The part that I really like at the end of this is we have a cash flow analysis where we take apart and in consideration all the different income sources that you have, whether it be Social Security, pension income, rentals, and so forth. We'll get a good idea of the income that your portfolio is going to generate. We'll get an estimate of the different taxes that you might be facing, whether that's RMDs or that's income tax, portfolio, dividends, and interest, and so forth. We'll give you an estimate of if that's the tax situation. After, we'll give you a breakdown, a year-by-year breakdown of the potential end-of-year balance for your entire portfolio or all the assets that you have. So you can get a good idea of potentially how your situation would look like, whether it be now or 10 years from now. Now, that's essentially the planning process. A couple items I wanted to highlight. And if you have any questions on this part, we can also touch on it at the end. But some strategies that our clients use with their traditional IRAs when they like being more charitable is getting their RMDs or their minimum required distributions and having that directly sent to a charity that they like or an organization that is qualified. And when we do that, what happens essentially is the amount that you would have been taxed for the RMD is essentially going to a qualified organization, and at that point is not included as a part of your income. So it's a way to give to an organization more strategically and not have as much of a tax impact when you have RMDs. There's other situations also. The other, I guess, important part to highlight on this is trust seed IRAs. So we'll use trust seed IRAs. Essentially, me and Mike will probably talk about this in just a little bit, but usually it's not advised to put your IRAs into a trust because it could potentially cause a double taxation. So a lot of large institutions, Bank of America, private bank being one of them, has created a trust for IRAs to pass on to your heirs in a way that's more efficient, in a way that is aligned to exactly how you want them to get it. Whether that's a lump sum over 10 years, you figure that part out and we'll help you get to there. Long-term care is another topic that a lot of people have asked us over time. So there's a few different ways to fund long-term care. There's ways you can do it more systematically, or there's ways that you can actually self-fund. So a lot of times, especially for our older clients, self-funding ends up being the best strategy because long-term care insurance ends up being more and more expensive the older you get. So at that point, when you're in your mid-60s and 70s, we'll usually try to create a strategy of you self-funding by different assets that you have that typically seems to be more efficient. If you're younger in your life cycle, there's different long-term care policies. There's some hybrid life insurance policies that include long-term care. There's a whole plethora of options available, but usually that's the rule. When you get to around 65, 70, it becomes too expensive for the cost benefit to really make sense. But there is different options for long-term care. Now, a lot of our clients will want to give to their favorite organizations, but they want to do it in a way that either they can do it over a long period of time, get a tax benefit now. Some don't really know the exact organization that they want to give to, so they want to earmark money and essentially give that over the next 10, 20, some odd years. Or they want to leave a lump sum as a part of their estate for their kids or grandkids to manage and give to organizations that they feel are worthy of their cause. We do that in different ways. One of the more cost-effective ways of doing it is a donor advised fund. There's very minimal paperwork that's required with that. Essentially, you get to take a portion of money that's already been taxed, and you can move that into an account that's called a donor advised fund. You get a current year tax deduction, and then at that point, that money's earmarked for an organization later on down the road. So you can give that at any sort of phase that you find best fitting for your estate. I'd like to end with our market outlook. And if you have any questions on this part, we can go a little deeper into it. But essentially for 2024, we see innovation and increased productivity being sort of a core tenet for continued market growth. Interest rate and inflation numbers normalizing over the next couple of years. Broadening of leadership in the markets. Last year, most of the market really grew with just top 7 stocks. We think this year it's going to broaden and normalize a little bit more and spread out to the rest of the market and not be so concentrated into the top 7. Some things that we're looking at as far as risks go. There's elevated geopolitical volatility, commercial property debt. That's a really big one right now in real estate. Timing with the Fed cuts. Last year, essentially the objective was at least 3 Fed cuts. Now we're going to 1. And then there's some situations where the market's pricing 0 Fed cuts. So there's different situations like that we're monitoring. U.S. debt servicing. I think last year in 2023, the U.S. debt servicing reached $1 trillion for the first time in annual payments. So that's another part that we're monitoring really closely. And then just some tips to really have a long-term investment strategy is just staying invested, don't time the market, having good quality investments that are fundamentally based, maintain a discipline and diversified asset allocation, and then making sure that within your diversification you have assets that don't necessarily correlate like a 1-to-1 to each other. And that's really it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I kind of have a 2-part question, but it might be one question. So I was going to ask, based off your experience, what are the challenges that you see most common to, say, some like seniors when they are trying, okay, maybe this is the first time that they step into your office, they're like, oh, like, I'm fine with what I'm doing, but I want to, plan for my, my future. I want to, ensure that I'm able to, continue my continuity of life for one, but also, right, I want to leave some for my kids, right? What are those challenges that you see most common to your senior clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the top things that I've seen that seem to be sort of a roadblock for our senior clients to get invested is number one, just having the potential volatility or risk in the market. A lot of senior investors are used to a time where CDs and bank money markets paid 8+%, and there was no risk in that, essentially. They're backed by the government, or backed by the bank, and then backed by the government, or by the treasury. So that sort of hurdle is number one, where you have to get out of that mindset of, this is a safe investment. But nowadays, with the exception of the last probably 24 months or so, CDs, money markets, haven't been a good investment. Over the long period of time, if we look at data, investing in a more diversified strategy is really what leads to successful outcomes. But that is probably the number one thing that I've seen where you have to get over that hurdle of thinking that CDs or money markets, those are good investments in the long run. Another one is either, depending on where they are in their life, either overspending or underspending. Overspending by taking too many distributions at maybe earlier on in the retirement, and that creates a sequence of return risk, which essentially means you're taking out all this money in the beginning, which has less money to sort of compound and grow over time. So that taking more money in the beginning essentially creates a risk of not having enough at the end. The other part is not taking enough. So whether that be for RMDs and essentially making sort of a balloon payment for your heirs later on down the road, that seems to be a risk for our seniors. Another one is, you have an annual tax exclusion that you can give to your kids and grandkids. A lot of our seniors don't take advantage of that either. So those are probably one of the top things that I've noticed. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about CDs and such. What about annuities?
Yeah, annuities are another option. It just really depends when you get them. They're sort of like CDs. In the last probably 10 years, excluding the last 24 months, CDs weren't the best investments, especially if you had annuities weren't the best investment, especially if you had a fixed annuity. If you're using it as more of as an investment to generate some sort of return. Annuities are better used for creating sort of a pension. That's the way we'll utilize them. We don't see them as an investment to get into sort of like a CD. We more so look at them as an investment to buy into if you want a structured fixed number of payments for the rest of your life. And sometimes you can do that for your life and the life of a spouse, and then maybe having a beneficiary at the end. There's different considerations you have to take with annuities. We don't see it as a sort of investment like a CD. We see it more of a structured retirement income source. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
What do you think about CDs for older?
Yeah, it just really depends.
Not CDs, the annuities.
Yeah, it just really depends. If there's different parts of your entire asset allocation that are covered with different investments that we think complement an annuity, I think that's great. Using it as sort of we'll use annuities as a bucketing strategy where you already have these other assets earmarked for specific goals, and then the annuity is, again, the part that we like to use it for is making sure that you have a supplemental income source in addition to your Social Security or pension to gap any sort of amount that your current income is not meeting. So we'll use it as more of that. Another way that we'll use annuities very rarely is if we have a ultra-conservative investor and they want that sort of assurance, because annuities are backed by the insurance company, right? So if the market goes down and you have an annuity, the insurance company, as long as they're solvent, then the annuity company backs those payments. So it is a form of more conservative investments. However, the way we like to do it is more so as an income replacement or an income gap filler. Or if we have someone that's really conservative and they're okay with the fixed return. Right now would probably be the only exception where that would make sense. Again, probably 5 years ago, that wouldn't have made sense because the rates were in the 1 or 2%. Right now, you can get fixed annuities that are in 5+, around that area. So it might make sense at the moment. You just have to make sure when you buy those annuities that the term that you're clear on the term of how long it is and what happens after that term. Because fixed annuities are only typically fixed at that rate for 3 or 5 years, some rarely at 7, but usually within that time frame. So a more long-term investment strategy, if for someone that's really conservative, we'll use long-term treasuries. They're backed by the US government, and they pay pretty comparable rates as annuities. So we'll use that more often than annuities when we're doing a more conservative portfolio. Yeah. Yes.
You said it's probably not a good idea to put your, what is it, your IRA in a trust. Well, in order to avoid probate, you got to keep your assets under 150,000. So if you have an IRA that has like 200,000, does that count against your net worth?
So not to get too legal or tax on that answer there, but essentially, to avoid probate, you have to have beneficiaries on the account, right? So if you just put a beneficiary, let's say it's your kids, your son and daughter. If you put your son and daughter as the beneficiaries of the IRA, that avoids the probate process. The probate process, to my knowledge, is only for assets that don't have any designated beneficiaries or that are not in a trust. So for the IRA, you can simply just put a beneficiary to essentially take over the account after your passing, and at that point avoids probate. The reason why you would do something like a trustee IRA is there's situations where our clients say, you know what, if it's going to go to my kids and my kid ends up getting divorced, I don't want his ex-wife or ex-husband to get access to that money because it's intended for my kids. So we'll use trustee IRAs to be really specific in that way, but you can simply just put a beneficiary on your IRA and avoid the probate process.
So you're saying the IRA amount does not count toward the probate?
No, I'm saying to avoid the probate process with the IRA, just put beneficiaries. And if you put beneficiaries, then the IRA won't matter, any amount, as long as you have beneficiaries.
Got it, because sometimes that's a misconception where it's like over a certain amount, I believe you're referring to, like over 150,000, then that might have to go through probate. But I believe, as long as there's a beneficiary, even if it's like $1 million, it doesn't have to go through.
Yeah, exactly.
I think my beneficiary is a trust.
Yeah, and you know the point that I was trying to make with that is if your beneficiary is a trust, you have to make sure that that trust is extremely specific as to the beneficiaries and follow the IRS guidelines, because the IRS has guidelines for trusts being beneficiaries of IRAs. And if you don't follow that to a T, as we do with the trustee IRA, then it could lead to a potential double taxation. So the better way of doing it typically in a lot of situations is either having, if your kids, let's say you have 2 kids, if your 2 kids are the ultimate beneficiaries of your trust anyway, then just having them as a direct beneficiaries a lot of times avoids that. If you're wanting to make the payout be specified over a certain period, then those trustee IRAs that we talked about, that's going to be better to do that.
I don't have any kids.
Well, whoever your beneficiaries are, yeah. Whoever your beneficiaries are, you have to make, I guess to come back, with your trust, you have to make sure it follows the IRS guidelines for making sure that the IRA is going to be, it's going to avoid the double taxation.
Yeah, so normally we wouldn't recommend having the trust be a beneficiary, so maybe something to look at, like Yousaf was saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Great, any more questions from the audience? One question I was thinking about, I was talking about, do you have any like recent clients you really enjoyed working with and like see any, like using your service, like good outcome for them, or anything in particular you want to?
So last week we received a new client through a referral bank channel, and essentially this client is going through a transition phase. Is a very large property owner, contractor, reached about, I think he's 67 now, and essentially has about 17 properties that he is trying to minimize the management over. He's getting older and doesn't want to deal with sort of the hassle and the mess of it. So we went through our planning process, made sure that if he sells these properties and now that he doesn't have this rental income that's been consistent over a long period of time, how is his cash flow going to fare over the next 30 plus years? His family has a long history of living to their mid to late 90s. couple to like their early hundreds. So, we wanted to make sure that he's going to be okay for the next 30, 40 years with regards to cash flow. That was number one. The other one was making sure that with the property sales, that he's not going to be subject to as much taxation with capital gains when he sells these properties. So we have a strategy that allows you to essentially move your capital gains from real estate and essentially move it to a real estate investment trust, which is a large pool of commercial real estate, and avoid the capital gain situation. There's a couple different caveats to holding period of how long it has to stay in there. Essentially, after about 3 years, give or take, you can start distributing out of it the principal and growth of it. During the whole time that you're holding this sort of strategy to avoid the capital gains, you're getting a distribution from this real estate investment trust to supplement the income that you'd be losing from the real estate property. So that's one of the more notable ones that I just had. He's extremely happy with the process, and then making sure that he was going to be okay with not having that sort of fixed income stream with the rentals. Yeah.
Nice. And do you have like a threshold normally you have to work with, like a minimum? Or?
Yes, so for Merrill Lynch Wealth Management, the minimum for us to work with you is $250,000 typically, but we have junior partners who, if you don't meet that, we can introduce you to, and they can help you. And I think the minimum for them is $1,000 or $10,000.
Yeah.
But for us to work with you directly is $250,000. And that could be in bank assets, it could be CDs, treasuries, it doesn't really matter. We can work that out.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Can anyone sit down and talk to you and have a retirement plan? If they give you the information they have about their assets and their planned expenses to get a retirement plan done?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't charge for that at all, so it's complimentary. You can come to us, just provide us your statements. So we'll have a meeting to get essentially the whole planning process that we went over a little bit ago. We'll get all the information that we need. We'll run a complimentary plan for you, and if you like it and you want to work with us, we'll be happy to work with you. If not, that's totally okay. You can take the plan and do it however you want to proceed with it, but we don't charge for having a review and a plan created.
The other question, I got here late.
Yeah.
Did you talk about, I haven't had to do RMDs yet, but is there any strategies we should be thinking about when we come to that stage?
Yeah, so the RMD age as of 2023 is now 73, and then in 2033, just in case you're not going to hit the 75 by then, in 2033, RMD age is going to go to 75. But essentially, if you start having to do RMDs, the best strategy to avoid, if you don't need the money, and if you're already giving money to a charitable organization or ACC, for example, if you don't need the money from the RMDs, you can do a direct contribution to ACC. We'll coordinate all that for you. We'll send a check to ACC, and at that point, avoid having to pay income tax on the distribution from the RMD. Yeah.
It's after 73.
Now it's after 73,
So
as of 2023.
once I turn 73, I need to think about moving that money within so many months of turning 73.
Yeah, it's specific to that. We could talk about that off channel, but depending on when you turn 73, you have to start distributions by a certain date, and you can choose to, again, if you want to do the charitable contribution, if you're giving to an organization anyway, we'll help you coordinate that. There are other strategies to avoid a portion of your IRAs, but it's not a significant amount. It's like $180,000 that you can move into an annuity, somewhere along there, dollar amount, and that part avoids it. But it's usually not significant enough to make sense with the fees of the annuities. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
No,
Stealing
take
your
as
show.
much as you like. Yeah, no,
So
go
it's,
for
it's
it.
really quick, I hope. So, are you taking clients, but assuming you're not, what advice would you give someone who is shopping around? What advice would you give them in knowing, okay, this person's right for me?
Yeah, so we're absolutely growing. We'd love to have you as a client. We have a threshold of about 150 households that we'd like to manage. We're at about 80 now, 80 to 90. So yeah, we have more than enough capacity to take on new clients. An advice, I guess, that I would give to sort of like my parents or anyone that I know is to just make sure that you have a connection with somebody and establish a level ground of trust to make sure that regardless of if you're checking your account consistently or not, that they're following your wishes, right? So usually with our accounts, we have discretion over the accounts and the investment strategy. So we don't need to call you to make investment decisions. If we see something moving in the market, we can do that without having to speak with you. The reason we can do that is we have fiduciary duty over the accounts, so that everything that we do is in your best interest and in the best interest of your account before us or before the firm. So making sure that is sort of set in stage, because a lot of times, especially if you're older, you don't necessarily want to get a call every day or two saying, hey, we're going to trade this, that, or the other. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's my goal. Help me get there in the most efficient and less risky way possible.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What if your client says, I do want to get a call every time prior to a proposed
Yeah,
transaction?
that's okay too. Yeah, we have some clients that we talk to every week, and some clients we talk to every 2 years. So at least once a year we have to have some sort of review. But some clients don't want to talk to us that much because they're traveling and busy with their grandkids and kids and what have you. Some want to talk to us every time we do a trade and understand the trade rationale behind what we're trying to do. So it just really depends. We'll get that in the initial meeting. The question we'll ask is, how involved do you want to be in the investment process, and how often do you want to be communicated to when we're making changes? And then we'll go based off however you want to be treated in that sort of client relationship.
Of your 80-some clients, is it in your practice, or
Right.
what's the average age? And
Yeah.
do you do a lot of trades of individual stocks versus mutual funds and other instruments?
Yeah, so average age, probably 62 to 65. Most of our clients are older. Very rarely we'll have somebody that's in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. Usually a lot of people in the younger group will want to do it on their own until they have some sort of a hiccup, and then they'll realize they'll need some assistance, so then they'll work with us. So usually our clients come to us around like 50 to 60, and then I have clients in their 90s. So it just, the age depends. We'll use, strategies-wise, we'll use a mixture of different strategies, whether that's mutual funds, exchange-traded funds, separately traded, managed accounts, SMAs, we use that a lot, which essentially is a mutual fund that you own the individual stocks in, and we'll trade those individual stocks. It's easier to harvest losses in, and so forth. We'll use a mixture of that. We'll use alternative investments, hedge funds, private equity, private real estate. It just really depends on the situation. And as far as the individual stock trading goes, yes, we do that as well. That with the individual stock trading, at that point is when we'll communicate with you more often, because we want to make sure with individual stocks, if we're trading them on a discretionary basis, we want to make sure that you're okay with that. If we're using a SMA, which is essentially like a mutual fund, because there's at least 50 to 100 some odd stocks in those positions, it would be way too much to call you. It would probably be 5 calls a day. So, but when it comes to individual stock trades, yeah, we absolutely do that. At that point, we'll be talking more often. Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry, Mike.
No worries.
I'm wondering about giving lump sums to my children and the tax that they have to pay when they get this lump sum. Is there some way in a trust to make it available to them if they want to do something, if they want to buy a house or do something so that they need a bunch of money?
Yeah.
And not have to, how do they avoid big taxes? That's really what I'm asking about.
Totally. That's a great question. I'll try to answer it in the best way possible. So essentially, the IRS allows for a certain amount of gifts to be given to your kids, grandkids, and so forth. The annual exclusion is I think $18,000 now for 2024. However, your lifetime exclusion for this year up until 2026, when it's supposed to revert back. Right now, until 2026, the lifetime exclusion for an individual is about $13 million that you can give to a family member, and essentially at that point not have to pay any sort of gift tax.
They won't have to pay the tax?
Yeah, there's no gift tax. The better way a lot of times, if it's money that you want to be handed down to them after your passing, that's less of a worry for about 99% of the population, because at the date of passing, any sort of investments that you have, whether it's stocks, mutual funds, real estate, they get a step up in basis. And again, as long as you're staying below that 13 million, and I think 7 million in 2026, as long as you're staying below those thresholds, the amount is not subject to taxation. When you start getting above that, that's when you start having to worry about estate tax and gift tax. Yeah, so for the most people, when you're doing anything above the $18,000, you have to file something with the IRS that they use to keep track of your lifetime exclusion. So, yeah.
And that's just for one person, right? Because if you have a married couple, then
It's like 26 million.
Yeah.
So most people are okay. Yeah, yeah.
great. Any
Yeah.
more
Mike,
questions?
you wanna-
Oh, yeah, no answer. Yeah, no, because I get a lot of these questions asked to me at my meetings, so of course I can't really answer them. So I always refer to financial advisors. So it's great to have, both of us here. So, well, perfect. Yeah, so I'll go over, my basics of estate planning. And then we could always have more questions then for both of us. So, yeah, so mainly what I do wills, trusts, and probates. So every day I meet with clients. They come to my office. They go over, what type of assets they have, who they want to leave it to. And I basically set up their estate plan. So that's what I do every day. Here's a little information about myself. But yeah, my great-grandmother actually stayed at ACC, used their care. I've had a lot of clients at ACC, so I have great fondness for ACC. I actually played pickleball here before and golf in their tournaments. So I love, coming here to ACC and helping in whatever ways I can. And yeah, my grandfather donates a lot to ACC, so he's here as well. Yeah, Herbert, yeah. Mm-hmm. What is a estate plan? So a lot of times people ask, okay, what is a estate plan? So it's basically a plan, who are you going to leave your assets to, who's going to be in charge, those are main components of estate plan. What makes an estate plan is normally you have a living trust, you have a will, you have a power of attorney, you have advanced healthcare directive, and all those documents work in conjunction with one another to make up a estate plan. There's 7 things you should know about estate plan. Essentially, everyone has a estate plan. So a lot of times people come to my office and say, I don't think I have enough that I need a trust. Yeah, normally if you just have a house, that's probably enough where you probably need at least some sort of estate plan like a living trust. Otherwise, your estate has to go through the court process of probate, and I'll go over that later on. It's also not just about when you pass away. So these are called living trusts. So even while you're alive, but let's say you're in a car accident or you're older, you can nominate people to help make financial and medical decisions for you. Your children can help you out, those type of situations. So it's not just about when you pass away. It's also when you're alive, but you're incapacitated. Also, you can clearly lay out in your plan like who gets what when you pass away. So yeah, most plans are pretty straightforward. If you have children, it goes to children. If not, there's other people, you have like siblings or friends or charities like ACC. So it's not, just simple estate plans. It can be complex as well. Also, we'll go over probate, like I said, later on, but that's basically a court process. If you don't have a living trust, it has to go in front of the judge, and that's a public process. So those are things you want to avoid. Like I mentioned, estate plan is not just, it is for everyone. It's just not just for the wealthy. So you don't need a bunch of real estate, like 10 properties. Normally anyone with just one property or even just with bank accounts, they want to make sure it doesn't go through the court process, probably needs a living trust. Everyone thinks that their plan is simple, but it's definitely a good idea at least to get it in writing so there's no confusion down the road. I've seen people even fight over, personal items like who gets this jewelry or who gets, this car. So you just want to make sure it's all clearly laid out. So when you're gone, your family members, your children aren't fighting over things. So it's all down there. It's always a good idea to, probably find a professional to help you out, instead of trying to do it on your own. As you saw earlier, people try to do it online, they run difficulties and they don't get it done. So. All right, and then here is something you always don't want to wait too long to get it done, because here's one example. I had a client, their fondest memories of going to the zoo and sitting on the bench and just watching the giraffes all day long. She also wasn't married, she didn't have any children, so she wanted to leave all her money essentially to the Sacramento Zoo. But the problem that she had was she couldn't find anyone basically to execute upon her plans. So she was searching for a trustee to basically carry out their wish. And during this time, unfortunately, she fell ill before we could complete her plan, and we weren't able to get her trust done. She sadly passed away. And her only family that her estate was going to go to was some sisters she had in South Korea that she hadn't seen, I think, in 40 years. So instead of her money going to the Sacramento Zoo, it actually went to some sisters who we couldn't really even find. So we had to hire like Air Finder to see if we could find these sisters to carry out her wishes to give them money to the zoo, but we could never find them. So I think her house just got foreclosed upon. I think the money's just sitting with the states. So, like I said, you don't want to just wait too long to get these things in order. Here are a lot of reasons, people don't get a living trust done. They're worried about either it'll cost a lot of money. Most estate plans are pretty reasonable nowadays. They're worried about, if they get it done, I've seen people superstitious. They're worried about like either they're going to pass away all of a sudden if they get this trust. They're having to think about it. So there's plenty of reasons, but honestly, after people get their trust done, they're very relieved. They're like, oh, thankfully I got this done. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. One less thing I have to think about always. I've seen people even delay going on vacation, because they're worried about not having a trust in place. So after it's done, they're like, oh, okay, now we can finally go on that trip we planned for a long time. So, all right, and here's California does have a default in plan. So unfortunately, it does happen where a lot of people pass away without any type of planning. So California allows for that. There's like mainly the children get it first or the spouse. So they do have plans in place. And a lot of times, people might not necessarily want that to happen if they don't have children. They don't necessarily want their assets to go to. So you just want to avoid that type of process. So again, there are concerns about the default plan through probate. It costs a lot of money. It could take a couple years in court. It is public record, so people don't want to, see all their assets end up in court process where people could view those type of things. So that's concerns about default plan here. All right, so avoiding probate. So essentially, it's very basic. You want to create a living trust. That's probably the main thing I talk about. If you just have a will, someone still has to take that will to court to get it processed. So that's probably the main question I get answered. I asked a lot is, if I have just a will, what's the main difference between a will and a trust? If you have a will, someone still has to take that will to court to get it through probate. Some type of things that don't have to go through probate, like we talked about, if you have a beneficiary on account. So let's say you had a bank account, and really that was your only asset. You just had one child, and that child's a beneficiary on that account does not have to go through probate. Also, if you have a joint account, let's say that you just have a simple investment account, and you add someone onto the account. I've seen that strategy where they add the child onto that investment account with you, or a bank account. That asset does not have to go through probate. Also, let's say you're married and you have a joint property. I've heard this asked, and one spouse passes away, does that house need to go through probate? The answer is no. So if it's a joint assets, like if it's joint tenancy, if one spouse passes away, that house would just go to the joint survivor. So in that case, that doesn't have to go through probate as well. How does the probate process work? Like I mentioned earlier, it takes about 2 years. Someone has to go and file a petition to be appointed. So sometimes that could take 3 to 4 months. And the time delay is honestly on the court end. Just to get a hearing date in Sacramento and other counties in the state, it takes just such a long time because the courts are backed up. That's why it takes such a long time. So all that time, like your house could be tied up in court. No one's really being able to access the funds. Sometimes you have minor children involved. All that time, the minor children can't get those funds that they need to, take care of their family. So, all right. Yeah, I think we talked about probate there, delays, and also there's a lot of fees. So, there's statutory fees involved. Was there a question, Sean? Or? No. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of times the fees involved in probate are a lot higher than doing a trust. Most of our probates anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 just in fees alone. You also have fees with the court. Those could be up to $2,000 in publication fees. So there is a lot of expense in having to go through probate versus if someone just sets up a trust.
Legal fees, $20,000?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so normally it's based on the value of the estate. So yeah, normally it's legal fees. And then also the executor of the will also gets paid the same fees. So you're looking at potentially $20,000 in legal fees, $20,000 in executor fees, and then potentially $2,000 in court fees. Yeah. All right, and I think I did talk about earlier the difference between a living trust and a will. So if you have a trust, that does not have to go through probate. It's a private document, it's not a contract. So when someone passes away, it's a lot more efficient to administer. A lot of times it could be done in approximately 3 to 6 months. You don't have to go to the court or the judge to get approval to sell a property. So normally people could access the money a lot quicker. also with a trust, if you have minor children involved, you could hold those funds in trust for the minor children so they don't get the money right away. A lot of times people want to wait till the children are older, till they're like 25 or 30. So in those circumstances, a trust is definitely the way to go. Or, if you have family members you don't want the money to go to, you could also have a trust so you could direct where the funds are going, picking the appropriate people to be in charge. So those are all the benefits of having a trust versus just having a will or having a default plan in place. Yeah, and also you want to ensure, probably the main question I get is, who should I pick as a successor trustee? So having a great plan is only as good as having someone to execute the plan, I like to think about. So you need a good successor trustee. Basically, when you pass away, someone needs to administer this trust. A lot of times for us, I recommend, if you have children that are adults and you think they're capable of handling it, a lot of times we start there. If you have, starting with adult children, I like to say, they're just managers of the trust. So they could always hire people to help them. They could always hire like attorneys, like ourselves, our financial advisors, like Yousaf here, our realtors. So they don't have to do everything themselves. They're basically just managing the trust. People don't have children. You can also hire family members, siblings, family friends. If you don't have any of those, there are professional fiduciaries. They could also act as successor trustees. So key qualities, like the slide talks about, you want someone that's trustworthy, that has good communication. Oh yeah, did you have a question right there? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the fee for setting up a trust?
Yeah, so for us, we have a flat fee for a single person. The entire package is $2,100. For a married couple, it's $2,400.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
If someone sues you and your assets are in the trust, are the assets protected?
Yes, I think you're talking about asset protection for a trust. If your assets are in a trust, are they protected? Yeah. So I do get that question a lot. So if it's just a standard revocable living trust, there's really no asset protection because all the assets are still yours to use as you see fit while you're alive. Sometimes people set an irrevocable trust. That's where there's asset protection involved, or basically you can't access the assets anymore while you're alive. It's tied up in this irrevocable trust. So that's the main difference. We don't really do irrevocable trusts as much. We do more revocable living trusts.
Answer a little bit of that?
Yeah, go ahead. No, of course. Jump right in.
We run into that situation somewhat frequently, just because typically the client size. So there are specific trusts that Bank of America Private Bank will set up for our clients or help them in finding a way to set up through a legal network. And essentially there's a grant or retain trusts that allow it to be irrevocable, but you still have some access. There's just certain parts of it that you have to give up sort of the control over. And then sometimes if you have a professional fiduciary or if you have a institutional trustee, sort of like private, Bank of America Private Bank could be your trustee, at that point you can have an irrevocable trust. It can follow the guidelines or income stream that you want to get. And at that point it becomes outside of your estate, so that if you get in a car crash and someone wants to sue you for $3 million, that at that point that portion has another level of protection than having it in a revocable trust or having it in your name. And then there's also rules around 401ks that don't typically have that sort of same credit risk or legal risk as, let's say, just cash accounts go. So there is different rules around how to move some of the risk away from your estate, whether that's cash or retirement accounts. Yeah, so there's those things out there.
Yeah, no, great. No, I get that question asked a lot also about people worried about like long-term care issues, right? That gets expensive. So yeah, great. Are any follow-up questions on that, or?
Can you touch on that point?
For irrevocable trusts?
Long-term care.
Like I said, I really don't do irrevocable trusts. I do more like standard living trusts. But yeah, did you want to go on?
Yeah, I mean the long-term care, it kind of just comes back to how you want to pay for it. Whether again, if you're younger, typically it'll make sense to get some sort of supplemental insurance to cover those costs later on down the road. If you're older, then at that point we have to figure out a way to separate out a portion of your money to be earmarked for that. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a special trust called a special needs trust, and for certain situations, certain clients, we recommend talking to an attorney to evaluate if that makes sense. A lot of the benefits for Medicare and the taxation for Social Security and so forth are tied to your overall income and assets. And if you have this special needs trust created and your assets are in there, you have a sort of a guardian that's let's call it a guardian, that's on the account that essentially for your benefit distributes money to you. Doing strategies like that would avoid having your Medicare get stepped up. There are situations like that we'll use from time to time, very rarely, for supplementing long-term care to move it away from your estate, but that's usually not a huge concern for our clients. Yeah.
You mentioned like B of A is involved in referring clients to attorneys who can help them with certain kind of irrevocable trust. Is that the kind of, do people use that sort of mechanism when they're trying to, you know, they don't want all their assets to go to potential long-term care and they'd rather become a Medi-Cal beneficiary?
Yeah, that's again where it
Forget
falls
what
into
they
that
call
special. Yeah, that's when it falls into that special needs trust, or they can use irrevocable trust. But usually, the special needs trust is designed for that situation where they want to take advantage of the Medicare benefits and not have to essentially and not have to essentially self-fund. But then, you know, most of our clients or most people should consider the sort of quality of care with that situation versus self-paying. So that usually that isn't a big concern or topic for most people because the quality of care makes sense to just pay on your own most of the time. So, yeah.
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone, or a number of people who said, if you own a house in California, you need to at least put the house in a living trust because the rest of your assets are probably below, is it the $250,000 threshold for avoiding probate totally?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, normally that's what we recommend if you have a
Even
house.
if you're poor, if you have a house, even with a mortgage, the fair
Correct.
market value of the house is what controls the threshold amount.
Yeah, especially in
You wanna
California.
get that
Yeah.
in a trust.
Right, that's correct. Any more questions in that area? Or? Oh, okay. All right, we'll keep going through my. All right, and then also a very important document is Advanced Healthcare Directive. So that's like in your hospital and someone needs help make medical decisions for you. It's a good idea to have Advanced Healthcare Directive in place. I just want to tell quickly a short story of the Power of Advanced Healthcare Directive. I did have one couple who were clients. They were married for over 30 years. So the wife had got sick and they lived in Mexico. So the husband had to take the wife to the hospital, nearest hospital in the U.S. in San Diego. He left the wife in the hospital because he had to go back to their home in Mexico and gather some personal effects. His wife had a son, and the son went to visit his mother in the hospital while the husband was away. He got Advanced Healthcare Directive in place, naming him the primary agent for his mother, and also he didn't want anyone to visit his mother without his knowledge or consent. And then so the son left, to take care of some things. The husband eventually returned to the hospital, and the hospital actually blocked him from seeing his wife because the son had put this Advanced Healthcare Directive in place. So it was a very sad story because he couldn't see his wife or make any medical decisions for her since the son had gotten this Advanced Healthcare Directive in place. And the hospital didn't want to get sued, because they had this legal document basically on their record appointing her son to make all medical decisions for her. Eventually, the son actually moved his mother to a different location, and the husband wasn't able to find his wife all this time. He called around a bunch of hospitals, and he wasn't able to find her. So, definitely you want to get an Advanced Healthcare Directive in place as soon as possible because, those things, unfortunately do happen. So.
Do you have experience litigating those?
I do, yeah, that was actually my case.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay.
Yes, so I represented the husband in that story, so that's why I was intimately involved in that. It was very sad, and ultimately everyone, they both passed away, and it got tied up in court for a long time. So, yeah. All right, also equally important is a durable power of attorney. So the same thing like a medical, this is for financial. So, a lot of times people call our office, and then this is very similar conversation. Oh, my parents don't have capacity anymore. We need to sell their house to pay for their care. But unfortunately, they're not able to sign things. And the title company is now asking either for some trust documents or durable power of attorney. And unfortunately, at that time, we really can't help them put a power of attorney in place because their parents aren't able to sign anymore. So I have to refer to my sister who works with me. She mainly does conservatorships. So now they have to go to court to be appointed to basically handle their parents' affairs to sell this house were simply could have come earlier while they had capacity and signed this simple power of attorney form to make financial decisions. So again, you don't want to wait till the very end to get these important documents in place. Otherwise, you have to go to court to get appointed. So. Here are some things we consider when planning trusts. There's either minor children. A lot of common nowadays are blended families. So you have people get married. They're bringing children in different relationships. Children they don't get along. You have people, wanting to disinherit children. So there's a lot of things that go into creating a trust. And basically, we need to consider all these factors and make good decisions for our clients and making a good plan for them. So that's mainly what I do in, creating these trusts every day. Here are some other components, providing for distributions where there are no children, providing for older care parents. A lot of times, still people have elder parents, so they want them to live in the home, if they're gone, or taking care of special needs children. We have a lot of that where they're on benefits, they're not able to take care of themselves, so you got to put in special provisions for those type of family members as well. Also equally important is probably the final point. After the trust is created, we also recommend going to these institutions like your banks and so forth and changing your accounts into the trust name. So just by setting up, that's not enough. So we normally take care of the real property, but then later on you want to go to your bank accounts or your investment accounts and then transfer those in the trust name. Normally, like I said, we don't recommend retirement accounts for the tax reasons we just went over, but all your other financial accounts normally need to be transferred in the trust after we're done. All right, and then here's some information on the ACC. So definitely a good idea, if you're planning on doing a charity, why not to ACC? A lot of times that's a great thing to do. So, great. I think that was it for my presentation, and it's a little after 4. Here's some contact information for us. But yeah, any questions for both of us? Over here, any more? No. Great. All right. Well, thank you for everyone for coming.
Yeah. No, thank you. I have a small sheet of sort of like a review and what you thought about the presentation. I'll put back there if you want to share your feedback with us. We would appreciate it. And if you want to contact either one of us, we'll be happy to talk. All right. Thank you, guys.